All right. Well, thank you very much for making the time to speak with me, sir. I greatly appreciate it. I wanted to speak to you about several things. One that something about which you've been speaking quite a lot lately, which is the possibility of nuclear war. You have mentioned several times in your videos something that I remember very well. I was born in the 1970s, and I remember the fear of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. I remember it very well, and the feeling of relief that came when the Cold War was over. And now we're talking about nuclear war again, which seems to me just as frightening as it was 40, 50 years ago. There was a piece in the American Conservative today titled "NATO Must Make a Nuclear Deal with Russia." The subtitle was "The Specter of Nuclear War is Closer Than Ever in the Ukraine Conflict." How close are we to pushing Russia into a nuclear war, and what is the political solution to getting out of this mess?
Well, how close are we? It's difficult to articulate because every second that you and I are talking is a second that we didn't die in a nuclear Armageddon. And therefore, there's a tendency to say, well, we're still alive. So therefore, it really can't be that bad now, can it? The problem is it doesn't become bad until it's too late, and then it's over, and it's moot. Um, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has the doomsday clock, and
Right.
they've been fluctuating that time back and forth for several decades now. And the most recent adjustment took it down to 90 seconds. And they say we're 90 seconds to midnight. And that's the closest we've been to midnight since the clock began. That's that's a misleading statement. We're 1 millisecond away from midnight because all it takes right now is one mistake, one miscalculation, one misjudgment um, that will set in motion events that will cascade rapidly out of control and result in a general nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia, which will terminate all life on this planet, at least as we know it, all life worth living on this planet. Um, and some of the triggers that could start this would, be non-nuclear in nature, so people tend to ignore them. Um, there was a time, and I'm very proud to say that I played an important role in this time that I'm about to speak of, where disarmament was in vogue. The world recognized the need to not just place limits on the size of nuclear arsenals, but to begin the difficult but necessary task of eliminating nuclear weapons, reducing the arsenals, and along with that, um, eliminating the potential justifications for their use, to de emphasize the role that nuclear weapons play, to take nuclear weapons down to their base character, which is a weapon of deterrence, since they are the ultimate destructive weapon. uh, as long as there is one nuclear weapon in the hands of one state, um, that state's potential adversaries must by necessity have their own nuclear weapons to deter that state from you. And when that state is the United States, which is the only state to have used nuclear weapons in the history of the nuclear era,
Right.
um, you can't belittle those who say, "Well, we need nuclear deterrence." When we parse out the reasons why the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, it had nothing to do whatsoever with bringing Japan to the surrender table. Japan was well on the road to surrendering. They had already indicated that this indeed was the path they were going to take. The nuclear bombs were dropped, and we know this now, to intimidate Russia, the Soviet Union, to let the Soviet Union know that in the lead up to the Potsdam post-war conference, that America had this weapon and Russia should tread very carefully about its intentions in Europe and in Asia. Of course, the possession of a nuclear bomb and the threat of a nuclear bomb only led Russia to develop its own nuclear bomb. And that's how the arms race has begun. And that's where we're at today, where 9 nations today are declared nuclear weapon states. And so I was proud to be part of this system to get rid of weapons, to de-emphasize nuclear weapons, etc. The problem is, of course, the United States. We are addicted to nuclear weapons. We are the nation that first tasted the heroin of nuclear weapons and the power that comes with having these weapons. And we've never been willing to yield this power, this sense of supremacy, superiority. Even in the face of the recognition that this weapon is suicidal, that if we use it, we die. The ultimate narcissism is to believe that you possess something that gives you eternal power, when in fact all it does is condemn you to eternal death. We're addicted to nuclear weapons as a nation. It's not just our leadership; it's the American people. There are a handful of us who say, we're just people. We're proud of who we are. I'm very proud of being an American. I love the freedoms that my country ostensibly, defends and stands for. But I've traveled the world enough to know that I put my pants on the same way somebody in Japan puts their pants on, that the American leg is not superior to the Japanese leg, that the American pant is not superior to the Japanese pant, that at the end of the day, we're just humans trying to put our pants on in the morning and get on with life. And the second you realize that, you realize that the stupidity and the futility of trying to carve out exceptionalism based upon nuclear superiority or nuclear supremacy. That doesn't make you exceptional, except to say maybe exceptionally dangerous or exceptionally bad. America needs to learn to live as equals with the rest of humanity. We are one of. I mean, I've spoken about this a couple times, but I can't remember the name of the effect right now. But basically, when American astronauts went to the moon and they looked back on the Earth and they realized how small and tiny and fragile the planet is, they were suddenly overtaken by a sense that they had to protect this planet, the overview effect or something of like this nature. But they came back to Earth saying, we need to do better. You see, when you're on Earth, you're surrounded, if we're just founded right here on the planet, we're looking around and we just see what's in our immediate horizon, our immediate sphere of control. And sometimes we get the feeling that we're more important than we are, that we're more powerful and more relevant, and that the world revolves around us because we seem to be at the center of the global universe. But the further you remove yourself from that, the more you realize that you're literally just this insignificant speck on this planet that requires everything to work into harmony if it's going to continue to exist as something that can sustain life. And America doesn't realize that. We think that the territory that encompasses the United States is somehow, I mean, it comes down to our motto, God bless America. Well, I mean, God, I assume this is the God of the Judaic Bible, Yahweh. And God, according to the Bible, made man in his own image. Whether you believe that or not, it's your business. I'm just saying that if we're going to say God bless America, and we're talking about the Christian Jewish God, and God made man in his own image, that implies that God made man well before there was a United States of America. And B, God made man, all men, not just American men, but the hubris that is contained in that statement, God bless America. it drives who we are as Americans, manifest destiny,
Mm.
the God-given right to go across the continent and make this ours. Um, we have to remember that there's a big world out there populated by men that God made,
Mm.
if you believe in this God. And, and it should be God bless humanity.
Mm.
God bless us all, but not God bless America, because the implication thereof is that God damns everybody else.
Mm.
And that's unfortunately the way America operates. The nuclear weapons are our addiction. They're that which we use to manifest this manifest destiny.
Mm.
And we don't know how to behave responsibly. Normally, when one is confronted with the mechanism of their own destruction, they will seek to eliminate this mechanism or contain it, so
Mm.
otherwise control it. We dodged a bullet with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of
We
the
did.
Cold War. We ended a very, very dangerous time in humanity's history,
Mm.
where America and the Soviet Union could have, and maybe some people would say should have, but we got lucky,
Mm.
engaged in a general nuclear conflict. But we couldn't give up the nuclear weapons at a time when logic said, since the threat has diminished to near zero, we should work with those who used to be the threat to eliminate these weapons that we built when we considered each other the threat. But we couldn't do that. We instead corrupted this process of arms control that I helped create, and turned it away from a mechanism of controlling weapons of mass destruction, controlling nuclear weapons, to asserting the guaranteed superiority of the American nuclear enterprise over everything else in the world. Arms control treaties, to the extent that they were engaged in, only were done uh, to diminish the arsenal of the former Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and to enhance the arsenal of the United States. We withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, one of the foundational treaties of deterrence and arms control. They gave meaning to the concept of mutually assured destruction. If you don't have missile defenses, therefore, when the enemy fires a missile at you armed with a nuclear warhead, it will hit its target, destroying that target. So, and the same thing is, if you fire your missile, you will destroy that which you aim at. Therefore, it's in both parties' interest never to fire those missiles, because of the mutual assured nature of their destruction. But the United States, now confronted with a weakened Russia, believed that we could take advantage of this situation, re-engage in missile defense, build missile defense shields that could protect us against whatever residual force the Russians had, while building and sustaining and expanding our advantage in offensive nuclear weapons systems, so that suddenly the concept of mutually assured destruction was no longer viable. What we were talking about is America winning a nuclear war, because America's been always about winning the war. We're never about finding the peace, especially in the post-Cold War era or post-World War II era, where as Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us in his 1961 address, farewell address, the military-industrial congressional complex has created a system that requires perpetual war footing. We are in search of enemies. We must find enemies. We must have enemies to justify the expenditure of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars every year in this defense enterprise, which has become such an important part of the American economy that we can't exist without it. So in order for America to survive economically, we must be at war with somebody all the time. And to preserve the nuclear component of this defense structure, we must therefore have targets that can be legitimately targeted with nuclear weapons. And so what we did is we went away from deterrence, and we started saying that nuclear weapons can be used at any time we deem them necessary to be used, even if there's not a nuclear threat. We called it weapons of mass destruction. We said it could be biological, it could be chemical, but we've expanded. It could be a cyber attack. If somebody launches a cyber attack, we can use nuclear weapons in response. And it got to the ridiculous point that during the Trump administration, a senior Trump administration official who was involved in defining the nuclear posture of the United States said in a statement to the Arms Control Association that it is the goal of the Trump administration that the Russians and Chinese wake up every morning not knowing whether or not this is the morning America launches nuclear weapons against them. That's insane. Literally insanity, but nuclear weapons are insane. This is the posture that the United States has today. Now, we also know that nothing happens in a vacuum, that there is cause and effect relationships, the yin and the yang. And when America behaves this way, the potential targets of this American nuclear angst will have to respond accordingly. And this is what Russia has done. Russia has rebuilt its nuclear arsenal to defeat the American ballistic missile shield, to overwhelm America's nuclear enterprise, and to guarantee the destruction of the United States should there be a nuclear exchange. Russia makes no pretense that it can win a nuclear war. Its president, Vladimir Putin, has said straight up that if there is a nuclear war, Russians will go to heaven as martyrs. He acknowledges they will all die, but he says we will go to heaven as martyrs. Everybody else will go to hell as the nations that started a nuclear war. But Russia has matched America's insanity, nuclear insanity, with postures of their own, which, while I won't call them insane, they are insane. I mean, I understand why Russia has done what it's done. I understand why China is doing what it is doing. They have no choice but to do this. But, Russia has likewise developed a nuclear posture that could allow for the release of nuclear weapons in a non-nuclear environment where the United States and Europe threaten Russia's existential survival, its territorial integrity, using conventional weapons,
Right.
which is where we are today. Today, we have a proxy conflict in Ukraine, which Russia has defined as being of an existential character, meaning that if Ukraine were to become part of NATO, this would create an existential threat to the survival of the Russian Federation. And Russia has said that Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO. Ukraine was also engaged in actions since 2014, which threaten the ethnic Russian or the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has defined the Russian nation, separate from the Russian Federation, the Russian nation, as being those people with shared historical, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, religious roots. And so, as the president of the Russian nation, Vladimir Putin felt that he had to protect these Russians. We now have a war in Ukraine. This war has taken on a unique character because it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the collective West, which is using Ukraine as a proxy. Right. And the collective West has now given Ukraine weaponry that can strike inside Russia and has told Ukraine it is okay for Ukraine to use these weapons to strike targets in Russia. The problem is, even though these weapons are conventional in nature, the targets that they are striking and have struck already are targets related to Russia's nuclear enterprise, early warning radars, potential command and control facilities, potential nuclear weapons storage facilities. These are sites which, if struck, would by definition constitute existential threat to Russia's continued survival. And Russia said that they have a doctrine in place which includes the use of nuclear weapons in response. Ukraine has struck these targets. Ukraine has already created the conditions under which Russia could, in accordance to its own nuclear doctrine, use nuclear weapons in response. So we are 1 millisecond away from the Ukrainians making a very bad decision with an ATACMS missile. I've described this as one ATACMS launch away from nuclear annihilation. That's how close we are to the end of the world. As we speak right now, Ukraine can make the decision to launch that ATACMS missile. And then we won't finish this podcast. If we do finish this podcast, people will say, well, Scott Ritter just said, we should live in fear, but man, that podcast ended. We have nothing to worry about. You are one ATACMS missile launch away from breathing your last breath. That's how close we are to nuclear war today.
Your documentary came out a couple of years ago about Zelensky was revelatory for me. It revealed a lot of things about Zelensky and about how the United States has been influencing that government that I had no idea about before. Is Zelensky, How high up is he on the chain here? Is he simply a puppet, or is he one of the active agents pushing for this insanity with Russia, this nuclear war? I mean, there have to be Ukrainians in Ukraine who realize the same things you and I do, that this is that he's pulling on a string that could lead to nuclear war. How much is he involved in this, and how much of it is just the CIA and Washington, the Pentagon?
Zelensky is an actor. That's all he is. He's an actor with a peculiar sense of humor because he was also a comedian at one point. Sometimes the confluence of his acting skills and his humor led to great success. I think Servant of the People, a TV series that he starred in, that where he played a common man who became president of
Right.
Ukraine, um, was a fantastic series. But we now know that this was a deliberate psychological operation concocted by Ukrainian power centers, oligarchs, working with Western power centers, primarily MI6, the British intelligence, to condition the Ukrainian people into looking at Zelensky and saying he could be president because he played a president on TV.
Right.
In America, we had a similar effect. I mean, first of all, we elected Ronald Reagan, who was an actor who could fall back on his acting skills, and people saw him as this brave, heroic, charismatic person, which he never was. I'm not saying he wasn't brave. I'm not saying he wasn't heroic. I'm saying he never fought in World War II. He was a movie star. So we won't know what the level of his heroic capacity is because it was never tested. But he was on the TV screen as this great leader, and we took that which was projected on the screen and projected it on him and called it reality. And this is what Project Zelensky was all about, turning him into something that the people saw, a noble everyman fighting for their, for their rights, fighting for their cause against the corruption of the establishment, so that when he then became projected as a potential president, they projected on him and said, yes, we can use this guy. Zelensky is incapable of formulating policy because he has never been in a position where he was called upon to do so.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that he's stupid. I'm not saying that he's you know inadequate as a thinker. But if you, I like to think that I'm pretty smart and I'm pretty capable. But if you took me and put me in NASA and said, you're a flight director today for a simultaneous launch of a resupply mission to the station, and we've got a satellite repair recovery over here, and we've got this over here. It's yours, Scott. Run it. I'd be sitting there going, I have no idea what to do, where to begin. And so what would happen is people would come in and start telling me what to do. And I would start playing the role of flight director. Someone would say, okay, now you have to call the space station. What do I say? Well, here's a script. Hey, space station, this is a flight director. Yeah, I need you to execute function 33C Charlie 5. Yes, that's right. 33C Charlie, you got it? Okay, good. Now, anybody watching would say, wow, Ritter's smart. He knows what function 33 Charlie 5 is. I don't know what it is. Somebody put it in front of me. I said it, and they reacted. This is Zelensky as president. He knows nothing about anything. He really doesn't. He literally knows nothing about anything. He's reading from a script. But here's the problem with reading. As long as he remembers that he's just an actor and that he follows the script, then things will go okay. As long as I am the flight director reading from a script somebody puts in front of me, things are going to go okay. But now we have an emergency in the Space Center. It's spinning out of control. And somebody comes in and says, this was what you're going to say. No, I'm flight director. Space Center, what I need you to do right now is jettison module 5. Why are you jettisoning module? Shut up, I'm flight director. And see, I'm starting to get involved in things I don't understand. I'm not qualified to make that judgment, and disaster unfolds. This is Zelensky as president today. This war, he was supposed to read a script. It was a script that elevated him to the status of Winston Churchill.
Right.
It's a script that made him a hero. It was a script that put Ukraine above everything else, became the center of the world, the center of the universe. And that script was working until it didn't work anymore. Suddenly, that TV series that took off season one, everybody's giving it 2 thumbs up. We love this TV series. Moves into the second season,
Mm.
and the writers tried to do something different, and people are going, I don't like this script here. I don't like this season anymore. It's not as entertaining as it was. And now the writers are coming in going, oh, what do we have to do? Let's kill off this character. Let's promote this character. And suddenly the actor says, no, you can't change this. I'm the star.
Mm.
I'm the star. The story that you made for me last season is the story that must go on. And now you have a conflict between the actor who has gone rogue and the screenwriters who are trying to bring this thing under control because it's spinning out of control. And that's the problem. Zelensky actually thinks he's the president of Ukraine.
Mm.
He forgets that he's there only to read a script. And because the writers promoted him as the new Winston Churchill, the writers can't take control of this guy, because if you eliminate him, if you write him out of the script, then the whole enterprise collapses. And all their careers depend upon the success of season 2. And the 3, they bought houses contingent upon the income that's coming in from this. So they have to keep the series alive with a character that's out of control. And that's the reality of Zelensky.
That's a great analogy about the script. He's reading from a script handed to him by his handlers in Washington. And as you were speaking about this, I was thinking of a new script that the world is reading from, the BRICS script, you could call it, or the non-Washington aligned script, or the script of a return to parity and sanity in global affairs, no longer subject to nuclear blackmail by people in Washington. Russia has taken a leading role in the BRICS. You could call it a movement, I guess, or a realignment. I believe they're the chair this year of the BRICS summit. There's a meeting coming up in July. Can you speak a little bit about Russia's role in BRICS and whether this script can replace the old script of Washington holding everyone hostage with nuclear weapons?
Well, BRICS is an outgrowth of, I think, global dissatisfaction with the G7, the group of 7.
Right.
The group of 7, of course, is, again, very narcissistic in nature. The 7 most impactful economies in the world.
BRICS is going to outstrip them, though, already.
Already has outstripped
Yeah.
them. And BRICS hasn't even started.
Right.
That's the thing. But the group of 7 came together to run the world via what is known as the rules-based international order. The group of 7 is the brainchild of the United States. The United States, of course, created a group of 7, not to have 7 equals, but to have the United States running, being the overlord of 6 subordinate elements.
Yeah.
And as long as the 6 subordinate elements worked from the script provided by the United States and played their role, we would hand down largesse to them and make them part of the team, and they would get the dividends that accrue from the rules-based international order. And then Russia, we brought them in. We made it the group of 8. And Russia's job was to subordinate itself to the United States, to bow down before the great American power, and to accept its role as the junior partner of the group of 7, and to just be happy to be there. You got invited to the party. Okay, so we're not going to let you break dance in the center floor. Sit in the corner there, but you're in the room of the party. Enjoy the drinks, enjoy the beverages, and enjoy being with really important people.
Right.
And Russia looked around and said, but we're really important too, and we happen to disagree with a lot of what you're doing, and we're going to do our own thing. And of course, the United States couldn't handle that, so the group of 8 became the group of 7. What's interesting too about the group of 7 is there's another country that isn't. See, Russia was given membership because we felt sorry for Russia, but we wanted to control Russia. The whole idea was a mechanism of control, and Russia won't be controlled by the West. But there's another economic power out there, because the group of 7 is not just a European exercise, although it's predominantly North American European. The Japanese are in it.
Right.
So there's this Asian component. But there's another Asian country out there. What do we call it? It begins with a C. China. Yeah, China. biggest economy in the world, most dominant economy in the world. Why aren't they part of the G7? Oh, because the G7, the rules-based international order, can't handle China. China's that which we want to use. Remember, the United States, the whole idea of sending Nixon to China and repairing relations was to capture the Chinese through the mechanisms of capitalism, which would then diminish communism, and then bring China in as part of our system. We would use cheap Chinese labor, we would get cheap Chinese products, but it's purely a colonial relationship,
Right.
not an equal relationship. China didn't play that game. China remained communist, but did capitalism better than the capitalists do capitalism. And they are the dominant economic power in the world today. This means that the world no longer rotates around the singularity of the G7.
Right.
It's not the center of gravity now. There's this Chinese economic center of gravity developing. It's still immature. If you look at the creation of the universe, it's spinning gases as opposed to masses, which have turned into, the solar system that creates planet Earth. It's spinning gases. But Russia's in that orbit now. And the rest of the world that's not part of the G7 they're in there spinning gases. That was BRICS when it first started. A universe being born, spinning gases, taking shape, nebulous in character and nature. We didn't really know what it was. It was 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that came together and said, we have a big chunk of the global economic potential, and we're not in that G7 club. Why don't we make our own club and see what happens? And so they did. They started talking, but it was still nebulous until the G7 started being exposed as little more than a tool of America. And I tell you, the big emphasis, you want to talk about the Big Bang Theory, since we're doing this whole universe thing. The Big Bang Theory for BRICS is it's a concept, spinning gases. And then the Ukraine conflict comes in, bang.
Right.
And then the United States says, we're sanctioning Russia.
Right. Yes.
And all these other states went, no, we're not doing that. Oh, suddenly the gas began to spin faster and faster and started accumulating mass. And then we said, well, if you support Russia, we're going to sanction you. No, we're not going to. Oh, now we're seeing, oh no, wait, there's masses forming up here. We're going to sanction China. No, oh no, there's structure now coming here. BRICS is coming. We accelerated the processes of stellar evolution by what we're doing. And now what we have is that there's an actual solar system there. BRICS. It's a unique solar system because unlike the American-centric system, there is, America is at the center, the sun. The BRICS one, though, there's several suns there. Now, that's complicated. It's not as simple as America dictating outcomes. This one requires consensus approach, working together, and it would normally take a long time, if ever, for this to mature into something that could compete with the G7. But the G7 has literally sanctioned itself to death. And now BRICS is compelled to do things. See, a lot of people would say, for instance, de-dollarization. It's too inconvenient, too expensive. It'll never happen because no nation, especially China, wants to sacrifice significant economic potential by going away from the dollar. It'd be too expensive. The system's not mature enough. But when the dollar becomes a weapon wielded by the United States and the G7, they have no choice now. Necessity is the mother of all invention. Right. And so now China and BRICS company are going, well, we can't stay with the dollar because they're using it to strangle us. So suddenly all these hurdles that seemed insurmountable are being leapt over. And that's what we're seeing right now. And Russia is the chair of BRICS this year at a time when BRICS is finally coalescing into this, cognizable universe, and structures are being formed overnight. I mean, we're talking instant. We're not talking about normal evolutionary process. We're talking about it has to happen now because we have no choice. And so BRICS we don't understand in the West the potential of BRICS. BRICS, because it's still an immature concept. It's still an immature entity. It still has, less than fully fleshed out structures. We look at it and we can't comprehend it. But anybody who, again, to take this analogy further, if you're an astronomer and you've studied the creation of universes, you've studied how it works, you can look at BRICS and look at where it is, knowing where it came from, and you can project with near certainty where it's going and on what time frame. And the global astronomers today, the economists, the geopolitical economists, can look at BRICS and say, I know where this is going. This is going to be a great life-sustaining universe. And now they're looking at the United States and they're saying that's a star that's on the wane. It's going to become a white dwarf. And then eventually it's going to become a black hole and suck everything around it into it. And that's the evolution. And I'm not overplaying this. The world is in a transition right now between the American hegemon and BRICS. And if you stay with the American hegemon, it will become a black hole and you will be sucked into it, consumed, disappear forever. If you want to live, here's your chance. You're those states that are out here deciding which gravitational pull you're going to go to BRICS. Go to BRICS because you'll join other states in a solar system that's starting to make sense. And it's starting to define it. And you want to be on the ground floor when they start to define who and what they are. And I'll say this to your Japanese audience. Get the hell out of the G7 and go to BRICS. Leave the G7. You don't belong. They don't want you. They are using you. The G7 is an American, North Atlantic, European construct. You're there just because you're a curiosity. You're there because they want to use your factories and your economic potential. They want to use your market, but they don't care about you at all. They will sacrifice you in a moment. The same with South Korea. Learn to live in peace and harmony with North Korea and China. Stop configuring yourselves to be in conflict with these people. You're not. I'm not saying you need to be at war with America, but never forget, and you seem to have forgotten this, Japan. There's one nation that dropped nuclear weapons on you, and that nation is the United States. And yet in a recent meeting in Hiroshima, you couldn't even have the intellectual integrity to say that. Russia did not nuke Japan. The United States nuked Japan. And the United States, not Russia, is creating the conditions for Japan to be nuked again. Vladimir Putin is going to North Korea. He may already be there. Instead of viewing this fearfully, Japan should send diplomats. I mean, I know you have diplomats, but you should have diplomats in Moscow saying, hey, what are you guys talking about? We're next door to you. We're sort of a little concerned about this. Could we get in on this conversation so that whatever you're doing with North Korea doesn't happen independent of Japan, but happens with Japan, weighing in on these decisions? You don't need to militarize North Korea because of us. But what Japan is doing instead is threatening to go to war with Russia over the Kuril Islands. Now, I'm not here to pass judgment on, Japanese nationalist sentiment and the value of the Kuril Islands to Japan. But, the question that the Japanese have to ask themselves is, because of what they did during the Second World War, maybe they shouldn't hold on to things that have transpired because of the sins of the past. Don't compound those sins by making new sins. And maybe if instead of being antagonistic to Russia, if you learned and offered to live in peace with Russia, solutions might be found that might be more equitable. But I can guarantee you, Japan, that if you continue to allow yourself to be embraced by the one nation that has dropped nuclear weapons on you, you will probably get nuclear weapons dropped on you again. And the next time that happens will be the last time.
What you are saying is, I mean, it's raising the hairs on the back of my head. I've made the same point here countless times. You cannot trust Washington. That's the one country that has subjected the people of Japan to atomic horror, radiation sickness. I mean, And it's the one country that they seem to trust here, at least the political establishment. But the the average people here, I think, are waking up and beginning to ask themselves, well, what is the calculus here? Why are we with the United States? And I agree with you completely about the G7. Japan is being used in this neo-colonial fashion. You mentioned the word transition, and the hint, for me at least, as to what kind of transition this is in your description of the neo-colonial nature of the G7. You know, we're talking about a hegemon in the West, and to me, this is an extension of 500 years of Western European and then American attempts to control the world. You're seeing this play out in a different skit, but it's the same play with the G7, and you've got the United States controlling the world, trying to arrange things around themselves. And then you've got BRICS, which I think is more than just a transition away from that. It's kind of an awakening to a complexity that used to exist before this rules-based international order. And the elites of the world bought into that, I think, out of laziness in part, that we could be part of the rules-based international order and we could sort of drift along with the current. But that's fallen apart, and the world has gotten complex again. Like you're saying, they're different suns, and you have to figure out a whole different system and this how this works. And it takes diplomacy. You've talked about this a lot in your videos. I agree completely. If Putin is going to North Korea, the papers here will denounce him as a dictator, and he's sitting down with Kim Jong-un. But my take is, why don't you go sit with them and see what they're talking about? Why don't you go talk to some people in Moscow and ask what's going on? Diplomacy seems to be a lost art. Maybe people should start learning how to talk to each other again instead of threatening nuclear war.
You know, I'm a casual student of Japanese history. What I mean by that is I'm familiar with the history of Japan, but I am not intimate with the history of Japan. I don't pretend to be a Japanese scholar. I don't speak or read Japanese, and I don't think you can claim to be a scholar of Japan if you can't do either. But because then you're a prisoner to somebody else's interpretation of the original script. But I'm enough of a student to know that militarism almost destroyed Japan. That the Bushido Code, the spirit of the samurai that encapsulated or captured Japan in the late 19th century and carried through to 1945 was not good for Japan. It almost destroyed Japan. And yet today, there seems to be this movement in Japan that is rethinking its past and trying to raise the spirit of the samurai to be socially acceptable again. And this would be a fatal flaw. Strength does not come from a sword. I know the Japanese culture postures the samurai to be very strong men, but all they could do is kill. And at the end of the day, where did they go? They died. If you choose death, that's what you will get. The strong man chooses peace. The strong man chooses to learn how to peacefully cohabitate, not violently confront. And the Japanese need to understand that the strength of their country comes from where they are positioned geopolitically and their great economic potential as a nation to become a center of prosperity in a region that is in desperate need of sustained prosperity. The future of Japan cannot be defined by its military. If Japan chooses this route, and we see the talk today about Japan talking about joining in on a war with Taiwan, the need to change its constitution so that the military now can be more usable. And you see the rise of militaristic thinking in Japanese culture and in Japanese political discourse. It is a one-way ticket to hell. Japan needs to grow a generation of diplomats. Japan needs to, there was a time when Japan was a world leader because of its businessmen who traveled the world and knew how to interact with the world. Japan needs to recapture that spirit, to send people out not to learn how to kill, but to learn how to talk and to become a voice of sanity in a world otherwise going mad. Imagine what would happen if Japan sent a diplomatic delegation to Russia right now and said, we are very interested in what you're doing with North Korea. We're not hostile. We're concerned. We want to know what you're doing, and we want to know why you're doing it, and we want to know how we can work with you and North Korea to make sure that whatever you're doing is in the mutual benefit of all of us, not to the exclusion of one of us. The Russians would, you blow their brains. They just sit there and go, whoa, we're not ready for this. Does not compute the thing. But then they would adapt, and the North Koreans would be like, well, okay, let's talk. You'd be surprised if you approach somebody with sincerity and say you want to talk, how much they want to listen to what you have to say. And I'm sure Japan has a lot to say. What they need to do is create the conditions in which people will start to listen to them. And you can't do that when every word out of your mouth is perceived to be the instructions whispered in your ear by your American master.
Right.
Japan has to become an independent entity. I'm not saying that Japan turns its back on America. There's too much history between Japan and America. There's too much real friendship between Japan and Americans. The American people should always be the friends of the Japanese people. The Japanese have a great culture that we could benefit from studying. America has a great, we have this notion of freedom. It's still not fully fleshed out, but it's a wonderful notion. And Japan could benefit from working with us to study this and understand it more. I am not promoting the demise of American-Japanese relations between the American people and the Japanese people. But I am saying that the American government, as it is currently configured, does not have the best interests of the people of Japan in mind. And that when they are whispering instructions to your leaders, those instructions are to the sole benefit of America, not to the benefit of Japan.
Completely agreed. I know you're a busy man, sir. Just one last question, if it's all right.
Yep.
You've mentioned freedom a couple of times. You mentioned it just now and then at the beginning of our talk. And I can't say I was shocked, but I was appalled when I read the news of your passport having been confiscated. You're an American citizen. You have the same rights under the Constitution that everybody else should have. You were going to attend a conference in peace. You're free to travel. You should be free to travel, free to speak with whom you'd like to speak, free to say what you'd like, and with no justification that was given to you, as far as I can understand. A couple of agents showed up, took your passport, didn't give you a receipt, no explanation for what was going on. Is America still interested in freedom? Has Washington become fascist? What's going on in our country?
Freedom's a word, and that word has a definition that appears in dictionaries. But left to that, those are meaningless words. Those are ideas without substance, without gravitas, without meaning. In order for freedom to become something visceral, real, it has to be attached to ideas and values. In America, we have defined ourselves, and this is why I love America, by the Constitution of the United States. It's not a perfect document. Hell, it can't be. It allowed slavery when it was first signed. So we know it's an imperfect document. But the basic notion of the United States is predicated upon the notion that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, meaning we understand that we are not perfect, that we are striving towards an ideal of perfection that's premised upon the notion of freedom, individual liberties, that are protected by the Constitution, enshrined as a body of principles, values, of law. That's the America that I love, that I'm willing to die for. That's the Constitution I took an oath to uphold and defend, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The average American has never read the Constitution of the United States. We don't teach it anymore. At least if we touch upon it in schools, it's superficially. There's not a requirement. I mean, the irony is today in America, where we mock immigrants, forgetting our immigrant history, that the naturalized citizen has taken a test on the Constitution and passed. A test, by the way, that most Americans who were born in America, if they took, would fail. If you're a nation defined by the principles and values enshrined in a document that nobody's read, then what are we defending? We don't know. You see, when those 3 Customs, Border, and Protection officers showed up, they weren't the rule of law, because the rule of law is the Constitution. And the rule of law allows me the freedom of speech and freedom of association. U.S. government doesn't have to like what I say, but they have to defend my right to say it, where I want to say it, and with whom I want to say it. The U.S. government acted deliberately with malice aforethought to prevent me from traveling to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. This is a statement of fact. It's not speculation. What they did was timed deliberately to achieve the result of denying me the right to travel. We still don't know why they did what they did. They haven't said. This is the Fourth Amendment, due process. Every American citizen is afforded due process. They seized my passport without due process, without justification. That's an illegal search and seizure by agents of the United States government, a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And then they stopped my ability to travel, the Fifth Amendment. So what occurred in JFK Airport wasn't just 3 guys taking the passport of an American that a lot of Americans are angry with and they're like, yeah, good. Well, you may not like me, and that's your right. But the Constitution protects everybody. Right. And the moment you allow the U.S. government to run roughshod over the Constitution is the moment you say that not just I don't matter, but all of us don't matter anymore. None of us matter. And that's where we're at in America today. That until which time we collectively stand up, we the people stand up and demand that the union that we sought to create perform in the way that we demand it performs. The union has no right to set its own rules. We, the people, set the rules. The union serves us. We don't serve the union. It is government of the people, by the people, for the people, in the immortal words of Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address. But most Americans don't even know who Abraham Lincoln is, what the Gettysburg Address was, and what the concepts he speaks of before 77 years ago. What do you mean by that when he says it? He's talking about the birth of a nation, the birth of ideas, the birth of values. Imperfect, I understand that. We enshrine slavery. We were not a perfect union when we were formed. In order to form a more perfect union, that is a work in progress, but can only be a work in progress if we, the people, participate fully as citizens that comprehend in great detail what we stand for, who we are, what we are. So that word freedom isn't just defined by a dictionary, but it's defined by the spirit captured in the heart of every American citizen who says, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is what I shall die for, defending.
It's been an honor to speak with you, sir. A lot of people support you. I can't imagine what it's like to be taking hits like you are in the public, but you keep speaking, and you're an American hero. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future, hopefully.
I hope so. Thank you very much. Good night from Japan. Thank you.
Good morning from America.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.